Hi, my name is Ken Asselson. I wrote a microbiome prescription website, and I got a interesting request from a reader. Basically, caught COVID in November of 2022, so 5 months ago, and ongoing problems. And one of the thing is his Epstein-Barr has been reactivated, which actually is a good thing. I'll tell you why shortly. So I'm going to do a quick look through the data from which I extracted the blog post, which this is in or linked to. So we've logged in, and my usual go to my profile, and what we see is the percentile ranking. In a balanced microbiome, all these numbers should be approximately the same. And what we find is there is a tremendous overrepresentation of the 0 to 9 percentile. And that means that there's a lot of bacteria which has a small amount there, but there's a huge number of them. That means there's not one bacterial problem. It means that there are many, many, many bacteria, each being a little bit of the problem. This is the very common pattern seen with chronic fatigue syndrome, as also with long COVID. Now, the program attempts to identify which one. In this case, actually, I don't remember doing any review of anybody having so many listed. And in the blog post, went through and enumerated out the percentiles, and everything was sitting 90, 95, 100 percentile, 100 percentile, 99. All these things are problematic. So that's sort of the first thing. I then hopped in to do the health analysis. The top part I'll skip for the moment. We do see COVID sitting there, but just skip for the moment. I'm working on improving those things, so that's just there. But then we go down to bacteria deemed unhealthy. Again, this is a massive list, far more than most people show, and we identify it there, gives a short description, citation to the study of where it's identified and what it's identified. Then, for example, reduced ability to handle inflammation because it's a low percentile, etc. So we have a walloping big number of bacteria. There's no, let's go for just one. Let's go for that one. We have a ton of different things, all of concern, which is where a human trying to figure out in their mind, even a very smart one, is going to be saturated very fast, which is one reason which I ended up developing the artificial intelligence. We go down to Dr. Harleck's suggestion, and we find we are at 56%, which is actually, for my reviews, it's about the lowest one that I've seen. I know they are lower because this is percentile, so there are some people with worse. But in terms of people who have contacted me to ask for a review, it is way, way lower than the majority of those people. And we can see where the problems are, and lots of things are not ideal. So that is sort of the high-level thing. Now, let's hop back to the draft there. And you see for the things identified as being problematic, which usually mean two things: high percentile and reasonably high count. So it's sort of a double header for why they were included. And you can see in terms of percentile there. And okay, we are off in new territory, much higher than typically shown. What I did do was go over, and because of the number of items there, I was curious to see how many of those bacteria will show up in the medical literature on COVID. And guess what? Everybody shows up, and here's the study for each one, back and forth. So we have quite a thing. Okay, going forward means hopping back here, and actually we go back to my profile, and we are going to do the shortcut, which is just give me suggestions. Okay, don't talk me through all the things, etc. And what this does, it does a calculation based on a multitude. We still see here, still spinning, the multitude of method which seems to produce good results to generate consensus. The cookbook suggestions are listed there. Things which are there, for example, minocycline. The list here are generally the ones which are usually prescribed for chronic fatigue syndrome, which again overlaps long COVID. So we see we have all the typical 80% of the typical antibiotics being prescribed for chronic fatigue syndrome are there. We see, again, common things are there. NAC is there. Sodium butyrate is no. Quercetin. So this gives somewhat of a short list. And remember, the items picked were generally those which are common with chronic fatigue syndrome. And the reason I did that list because most people are, or many of the people are dealing with that condition or a comorbid condition. So it just goes through and spells out things one way or the other. So it is a very quick. However, what we really want to do is go over to see more technical details. And the more technical details, we say, what? The whole stack top is full of antibiotics or antivirals. That usually doesn't happen. I get one or two, but not this type of whacking everything. But then again, the reason probably is because of so many bacteria with small amounts but very high levels. And the result is the only way to deal with a bunch of them is antibiotics. We do, however, have some nice things. For example, if we decide not to look at antibiotics, but look at herbs and spices only, herb and spices here, then we get a list, and we get a good list, all with reasonably good values there of herbs and spices to take. So that's there. We can also go over and look at prebiotics, and we get a list of things there. But notice right here, important thing, we have a bunch of negatives. Often these things will be suggested by your MD or naturopaths or gurus on the internet. These are the cure-alls. Well, a bunch of them are not. So it spells out there. If you go and clear the list here, and you just click here instead, you will see things to be avoided. For example, macrolide, which is sometimes used for chronic fatigue syndrome. In this case, it's a definite avoid that one. Stevia, another avoid. High sugar diet, another one. Carob is to avoid, but chocolate is to take. So carob and chocolate are chemically different, and the microbiome reacts differently to that. E. coli should be avoided, but then again, if you went back and look, the reason to be avoided is he has high E. coli. D. ribose is to be avoided. Why? Because it feeds E. coli. And we can go on down there, avoiding fluorine. Fluorine does impact, fluoridated water does impact the microbiome, and it's one of the things to do. Don't just go out and buy bottled water. The reason is often bottled water comes from fluoridated public water systems. Unfortunately, yes, it is all whatever. It has been through reverse osmosis, other things. Unfortunately, fluoride will go through reversed osmosis, to my understanding. What you may want to do is actual spring water, which is truly coming from a spring, which often means European brands. Many, quote, spring water sold in the US are not actually true spring waters, but marketing labels. So we go through and we have a variety of things to avoid. Usually let's just go through and see if any of them are a regular part of your diet or whatever, and take it accordingly. Top priority, you can go and take a look at diet style. Not as good as other methods, but basically you want dietary fiber in. You want a high fiber diet, ketogenic one, Western diet. So, but now we're getting down into not strong recommendations, sort of whatever. Low food map is barely on the list, and I probably would suggest not going there unless you're already on it. And then we have other types of diets. And if we go on to the second page, we have high fat diets, high beef diets. Gluten-free diet is also on the avoid. So take a look at both of them and check everything, because again, what works for one person won't work for the other. And basically, I have more confidence in these computed methods than for internet wisdom. Okay, so I think I'm just about done. The person asked a couple of questions. One of the question is, how do you go about getting prescription antibiotics? I've had that battle myself. Ideally, your primary care physician would be willing to prescribe one. I include an article from this week's New Scientist about the microbiome and long COVID, which hopefully will be reasonably convincing for him. New Scientist is a well-recognized science journal, and it's a very easy to read article. Other choices are looking for practitioners or MD dealing with Lyme infection. And here's where the Epstein-Barr virus comes in. Usually, Lyme tests will return a false positive if a person has Epstein-Barr. It's a known, well-established issue. Don't mention you having Epstein-Barr reactivated. Let them go with the cheapest test to do, get positive results, and now they have a rationale for prescribing antibiotics. Very simple. You have Lyme. You don't. Don't tell them. What you're trying to do is get antibiotics so they can correct your microbiome. There are also a few ways which I'll mention. These are not recommended, but I know people who are desperate have done so, and they are not that bad, but always do, if possible, under medical supervision. If you can't get antibiotics, or for philosophical reasons you prefer not to get antibiotics, just remember your gut is already fouled up badly, so antibiotics are probably not going to make it worse. It's probably going to make it better. So that's a common argument you probably can ignore. And the explanation of how we calculated it is actually giving you a reference to the 1972 program. Hey, I was programming back in 1972. I remember when it just came out, and I was fascinated by it, and the methodology stuck in my mind as being good. It was expensive, high overhead one, which is why it did not catch on. High overhead because it requires a huge amount of manual input to do it. Many MDs, if you hear the word artificial intelligence, would say forget it. The key thing is to point out that it is not the usual artificial intelligence program. It is the one used by Stanford University for medical purposes with good success back in 1972. Current popular things are machine learning and large language models, which is ChatGPT. Both of those basically toss data or pages added, and then it attempts to sort things out. This model doesn't do that. This model does something very different. Somebody has gone through, read the articles, extracted out the key information correctly, have encoded in the database. There's no machine trying to figure out what it means. It is actually a person who reads and do it. I'm actually working with a group who was replicating some of the work for a specific medical conditions, And all the people I'm working with are PhD or PhD candidates. These are people who know how to read the studies. So basically that's it. There are links here to the process. Probabilistic inductive logic programming is a mouthful, and it's basically came along much later than the 1972, so it was unknown back in that days. If you don't want to go down the prescription path, we do have a bunch of things. I would suggest getting the oils, and basically you may find that you actually have a die-off or Herxheimer reaction from the oil. Some probiotics. I have been rather blatant here, citing my usual source where I buy my own probiotics from, which is Custom Probiotics. You do get sticker shock price because it's $50 to $100 a bottle. Which you say, what? The catch is that $100 bottle has more probiotics in it than a dozen or 2 dozen $30 bottles. So $100 bottle or a dozen $30 bottle. That's $360 versus $100. Wait a minute, that's cheaper. So that's where I go. And also they give better dosages. Most of the other ones are, quote, maintenance dosages or dosages pulled out of the air. The custom probiotics dosages are pretty much in line with what has been used therapeutically in clinical studies, in which case what they advise you to take is there, and I just basically gives them a big thumbs up. I do disclaimer, I don't have any financial interest in it. I make use of them myself. Reminding to look at the high and low values, and then my usual disclaimer, hey, I'm a software developer, I'm a statistician, I'm not a medical professional. I do know artificial intelligence. I've been doing artificial intelligence programming, etc. for probably 40 years. I've worked for Microsoft, I worked for Amazon, I worked for Verizon, and I have done the old school expert systems, which is why the old school expert systems, although they are expensive in terms of manpower, their results are good because, among other things, you get a complete evidence trail. So you can show exactly why suggestions are being generated, which is ideal. Machine learning or ChatGPT, you cannot really get an evidence trail from either of those, unfortunately, which means they're black box. The microbiome prescription one is not black box, it's open box. So you get all the information. Okay, I think I'm going to shut up and get this up.